I am not sure, Camila. I assumed it would be video, but we need the host to turn that on.
Yep. This is kind of awkward.
It is a bit awkward. We're on Zoom, but I can't see you.
Yeah. Should we? I don't know if we should start the interview without the video on or not.
Well, let's do this. Why don't we start it anyway? And if they decide to turn it on, they can do that.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Are you able to turn on? Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes, we're live. Awesome. Great. So for everyone watching, this is CoinDesk Year Zero from Those Who Were There panel celebrating Ethereum's 5th birthday. And I'm hosting this panel. My name's Camila Russo. I'm the founder of DeFi-focused content platform, The Defiant, and also the author of The Infinite Machine, the first book on the history of Ethereum, sitting there behind me. And we have Anthony Di Iorio, one of the co-founders of Ethereum. So really excited to chat with him. We haven't talked for a while since our interviews for the book. So really excited to see what you're up to. So Anthony was, like I mentioned, one of the initial 8 co-founders of Ethereum. He organized the famous Miami trip, which was one of the only times most of the Ethereum founders were together, and where Vitalik announced the project for the first time. He helped bootstrap Ethereum in the very early days from the Toronto hub at Decentral. So really great to be chatting again. And to start, maybe you can retell the story of that fateful Bitcoin meetup in Toronto, where you first met Vitalik, and that was probably what kind of kickstarted your involvement in Ethereum, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was about a year before actually more than a year before Ethereum was, I guess, first brought to some of the initial people. But I had decided to set up a meetup in Toronto for Bitcoin because nothing had existed, and I had been digging into Bitcoin for a number of months prior and just absorbing everything that I could when I found out about it in the summer of 2012. And when I looked for a community, I found it was about time to start, interacting with other people in Toronto. When I looked for any type of community, there was nothing out there. So I went up on meetup.com and I started a meetup for Bitcoin and put a call out to other fellow Toronto residents that were interested in learning about Bitcoin. And I had a place at a bar that I was able to take a back area. And I think it was roughly 10 people. I don't remember the exact amount. Roughly 10, I think it was, that showed up. And Vitalik was one of those people where I first met him. And Peter Todd was another, and a couple others notables in the community. And that was really the spark of our first meeting. And I think Vitalik really stood out to me as a very, very quiet, humble, person, very, very super shy at the time. And over the next few months, I was hosting them on a monthly basis and got to know him more. And the meetups grew from 8, 10 people up to hundreds afterwards. And then I later on started doing them weekly even. So that was really the genesis of the Toronto Bitcoin scene, was bringing people together. And I kind of became a center of gravity for the community, hosting the events and getting to know people, and ideas started flourishing and people coming together with fantastic ideas. And that then translated to, over the next few months, Vitalik had been traveling around the world, and I myself as well had been traveling around the world. I'd set up the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada, a national nonprofit organization. After doing Toronto, I wanted to connect with those around Canada. So I started a nonprofit, more of a national organization, and I was traveling around the world as the executive director of that organization, doing speaking engagements, and then expanding my global network of in the crypto space. And I would meet up with Vitalik every once in a while at different conferences, and he was writing at the time for Bitcoin Magazine, and he was doing some specific articles on what I was doing in Canada on Bitcoin Magazine. And just got to know him and saw his progression over that year. And one interesting thing was going to the Amsterdam conference that Mo Levin had put on. This was one of the initial ones in 2013. And seeing Vitalik go up on stage and just being so impressed with his transition towards and his confidence towards being a speaker and someone that could start really relaying ideas. So it was really interesting over that year to see him flourish in terms of coming out of his shell a bit and being able to present in front of people. And I think that year was probably one that he really grew and started really showing his smarts, his writing skills with Bitcoin Magazine. And so yeah, that kind of started right from the Bitcoin meetup in the end of 2012.
And I guess that kind of relationship with Vitalik then led to him showing you his Ethereum white paper. Like how was that when you first got it, and then taking this growing Bitcoin community in Toronto? How did an Ethereum community start to form after Vitalik sent that white paper?
Sure. So in 2013. Me and my partner at the time, business partner, we started building Bitcoin wallets. The company was called CryptoKit, and Vitalik actually helped us out quite a bit with CryptoKit, and he was providing some advice and guidance, and even helping us through some issues that we had. Well, there's one time when Google Chrome had removed CryptoKit from their store, and it really caused a lot of chaos because a lot of our users were basically, their wallets were gone. And they ended up removing us because there were a lot of copycats of our product, and they accidentally removed our product along with all these copycats. And Vitalik jumped in. I remember I was traveling one time and it was the middle of the night, and I got this call at the hotel that, okay, everybody's wallets are gone. Chrome's removed the app. And I remember Vitalik jumped in and basically was able to figure out how users could still access their wallet, even though the Chrome extension wasn't there. And when Google put it back up, everything was fine. And it was really interesting because that was the time that Apple had been removing a lot of crypto products. And we thought Android, that Google was doing the same thing. But it turns out that they actually put an announcement out afterwards that they apologized that they removed the app. They didn't mean to, and that they were actually pro Bitcoin, or they weren't going to be following what Apple was doing. So it was really interesting. It was the first announcement that Google was actually okay with what was going on in the crypto space, unlike with what Apple was doing. So because of what Vitalik was doing with CryptoKit, and he's from Toronto, we were meeting at the meetups, we were meeting internationally, we really built up that relationship there. And then when I set up the physical hub of Decentral around the same time that he was working on the white paper, he showed it to me. I showed it to Charles Hoskinson, who had also I'd been connected with recently. He was working on the Bitcoin education project at the time, and I was working with the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada. So we were both involved with educational stuff and trying to bring together communities. So when Vitalik showed me the paper, I thought Charles would be a great person on the technical side to take a look at it and see what he thought. He was, floored with what he saw. I connected Charles with Vitalik, and that's the three of us there. And then Vitalik brought in Mihai that he was working with Bitcoin Magazine, and Amir Chetrit, who was on Color Coins. And that was the genesis of the five of us starting the chat groups together on Skype. And that's really was the first five that emerged as the initial five founders of the project, which then expanded out to the 8 after that.
Right. And so what, in those very early Skype conversations, what sort of things were you discussing?
Well, so this was the beginning of December 2013, till about the end of December 2013. So it was the initial thoughts. Okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to build up communities and let people know about this? So we really started showcasing what we had to a few select people, and then it started really just growing. It started just organically. We had I don't know, there were dozens and dozens of Skype groups that we had. And Skype was really the main channel that we were using for the first few months. So we had we called it there was the founders channel, which was called I have to remember what it was actually called. But it was basically, we were the ones that were taking responsibility. We were the ones that it was a fiduciary group. It was those that were saying, okay, Satoshi never came out when he launched Bitcoin. With what we're doing though, there's people behind it and we want to be visible. So what, as the founders, and what really determined us as the founders was the fiduciary responsibility that we were taking and the risks that we were taking to start setting up the organizations, to start hiring the team, to start setting up the business. I set up the Ethereum Canada organization so that we could start hiring people, and we had to pay people and things. So I was the sole director of that organization because it was the fastest thing to put together so that we could start hiring. We brought in an HR person to start building up a team. I brought in my lawyer to be the first lawyer on the project. And it was the risk. And this is what really differentiates the founders from others in the group. Not necessarily make people think of, there's a lot of people involved, and there were tons of people that contributed and brought this project to fruition. I think at one time the total was about 50 or 60 people that we determined were those that contributed in the early stages that were actually rewarded with a portion of the sale because of the effort and work they put on as a part-time worker, a full-time worker, or as someone that was temporary or that was minimal.
Right.
So it was that fiduciary responsibility that we decided that we were going to take on because there were so many unknowns at the time. We didn't know how the world would react to this new platform that was being announced as we were trying to set up a product sale. There was a lot of unknowns, and we said, we'll take that responsibility and that risk. And that really was a determining factor of the founders, that if anything was to happen and anybody might have been at risk, it was those people.
Right.
So that's kind of the distinction of what makes the founders and what didn't. And we eventually expanded out to the 8. It was really that fiduciary responsibility that we took on, that if something did happen or something went wrong, we would be the ones that would be responsible.
Yeah, makes sense. And so another kind of important discussion that was happening in the very early days was this idea of what Ethereum would be going forward, this either a nonprofit foundation or a company. And so I remember you telling me you felt a little bit blindsided, right, by the decision to make it a foundation. And so I'm curious now, seeing what Ethereum has done so far, do you think it was the right decision, or what's your view, like looking back at that discussion?
I think we'll never know how it might have happened if it went in a different direction.
Right.
And I think you can only look at the success of things right now and say it's really amazing what's come out of this. And it's really hard to say how things may have been different. We had a debate back in the day, and we always reference as, do we want to be the crypto Mozilla or do we want to be the crypto Google? Not in terms of those companies themselves, but just in the idea of there's so much that a few of us believe could be more advanced with proper funding mechanisms and run as an organization. But there was the other side of it as well. And in the space, it's very difficult to get alongside people that are in the decentralized movement when you have corporate entities and things involved. And I understand both sides of those things. So I don't know what it could have been. All I can say is that it is what it is. And I think it's been amazing. And it's just, I don't think I'm here to say whether it could be better, it could have been worse. I just think, look where we are right now. We're having events around the 5th year anniversary, and it's just an amazing thing that's transpired. And it's just, hats off to everybody involved for taking it where it is right now.
Yeah. And so looking forward, are you still as bullish as in the beginning? And like, where do you see it going?
So I was bullish in the beginning. When Ethereum was when it first started out, the idea of something beyond Bitcoin was really, it wasn't out there. The concept, everything was Bitcoin. My organization, my company, was Bitcoin decentral. When Ethereum came about, it was, wow, there's something else that could be more powerful out there. And the transition really changed towards what can we do to improve things from where they are. There was a number of years that had gone by before, between the start of Bitcoin and Ethereum, a lot of advances in technology. So super bullish when Ethereum came out. I dropped the Bitcoin from Bitcoin decentral. I turned it now decentral, realizing that there's more than one. And never did I ever disregard Bitcoin or think that Bitcoin is not as amazing as it is. I tend to try to be very inclusive. I think any technologies that advance our space, the decentralized movement further, is worth taking a look at. So super big on Bitcoin. And then with Ethereum, super bullish on Bitcoin. And then after Bitcoin, for me, it was, you know what, there's going to be others that come out. And is Ethereum going to be the be all and end all afterwards? And for me and my mission, would it make sense to continue to try to empower people to be in control of their digital lives by creating wallets and technologies and infrastructure for many other different projects? And that's what I continue to do after leaving Ethereum in the later 2014. And so I would say that there's even a period of years from then until now where I might not necessarily have been super bullish with Ethereum. To me, it's whatever makes a perfect project. You have to have elements of community. You have to have elements of structure. You have to have elements of where the funding comes from. There's so many different elements that make a perfect formula for what a project is. And I must admit that I thought there were some things that were deficient in Ethereum. I think that after the departure of a few people in the organization, there was a little bit of, okay, we're now, the project was a little deficient in certain areas. It was very strong on the development side and being able to organize the developers in the project, but on the business and structure and what needs to be done when you're in a project that has to have entities in different countries. With that comes a lot of responsibility in terms of setting up corporate structures, hiring people, all the different things that are involved. And I do think that the project was deficient for a period of time of that organizational structure. In fact, I came back after even leaving to help settle things with the board. And I traveled back and forth to Switzerland to try to help out with some of the issues that arose when the new board came in and when Ming, the executive director, was having some issues. I think it was about 3 or 4 times in the span of 2015. I traveled back and forth to meet with lawyers. This is after I had left, but I was asked to come back and help out with some things. And so I was not convinced that the way things in 2015, not on the development side, on the technology side, but more on ensuring that the structures, the legalities, and the things that needed to be safe and secured were being done. So I did think that there were some deficiencies in the project, which led me to, I continued my plan with, I'll support other projects. And I was very early on and helped get things like VeChain and Quantum, a lot of the Chinese projects off the ground. But I think there's a time for the last few years up until this year where I did feel that there was opportunity for other projects to step in and potentially stake their ground. And this year, I've come more back to the thinking that Ethereum, is set itself in a very good place with the community, with the developer community especially, the amount of businesses and projects being built on it, that it is heads and shoulders above the closest competitors. And I think that I do feel much more bullish of where Ethereum is now than where it's been over the last few years. So I must say that yes, I support many different projects, but I do think that Ethereum has positioned itself for success. And I am confident in what's going on with the project right now. And I do look forward to a number of years of it just sailing high.
Wow, what a good way to end the panel. That's breaking news here. I think, Anthony Di Iorio, the most bullish since the project started. Awesome. Well, great chatting. I wish we had, if you can quickly catch us up on what you're doing right now before the next panel starts.
We've got maybe a minute left. My company, Decentral, builds Jack's Liberty, which is a way for people to manage multiple different cryptocurrencies on many different platforms. So it's always been my goal to provide infrastructure and create the tools that empower people to be in control of their lives. We're non-custodial. We never have access or take control of customers' keys or have access to them. We support many projects that our users want to use. So we're much more inclusive in what it is we do. And Bitcoin and Ethereum are the 2 top projects which account for 85 to 90% of what it is that we do with Jack's Liberty.
Awesome. Great, Anthony. Great chatting again.
Thank you, Camila. And I've really enjoyed the book so far. I'm about 3/4 of the way done. And I just have really enjoyed it. And there's not one part of it that I thought personally that is not accurate. And I think you've just done an amazing job of bringing the history to it. So congratulations.
Thanks so much. That means a lot. Thank you. So glad you're enjoying it.
Okay.
Bye. Okay, so are we live?
Hi, Cami.
Hey, Adam.
How you doing?
Hey, Texture.
I
Oh,
put
hey,
on obedient
Ken.
sunglasses for you.
Yes. Signature style. Awesome. Everyone's on. This is exciting. So many characters from my book. Great. So this is the second part of the Ethereum Year Zero panel for CoinDesk. Again, I'm Camila Russo, the founder of the Defiant and author of The Infinite Machine. And I'll introduce the panelists for this part of the panel. So Ken Seiff is the managing partner of Blockchain Ventures. It's a venture fund investing in early stage blockchain companies. And his very first investment in crypto was in Ethereum's pre-sale, which I narrate in my book. Anthony Di Iorio, aka Texture, was part of the team overseeing communications of Ethereum in the very early days and has remained a very active member of the Ethereum community. And he first heard about Ethereum from Adam. And Adam V. Levine here led one of the crypto's first and the most followed Bitcoin podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. And that evolved into the LTV network with its own LTV coin. And he continued to experiment with different tokenization projects at Tokenly. And he is now the editor at CoinDesk Podcast. So it's a really diverse and interesting group that we have here. You were all involved in some way or another in the very early days of Ethereum. Ken as an investor, Texture as a community manager, Adam as a journalist and enthusiast. So I'm interested to hear how do you remember thinking and understanding Ethereum when you first read the white paper or learned about it? Was it like the next Bitcoin or a scam or like a platform for unstoppable applications? How did you make sense of this new project? Adam, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So thanks for having me, by the way, Cami. So it wasn't another Bitcoin because everything had been trying to be another Bitcoin to that point. And for me, I was looking for solutions, and Ethereum offered some really interesting ideas about what was possible with a blockchain that you couldn't really do with Bitcoin, at least at that point. And then the other thing about it that was very interesting was that it was Vitalik. And Vitalik, before he became the founder of Bitcoin, was like one of the really earliest journalists in the space. Before I, was doing journalism in the space, it was Vitalik, and he was super young. And I met him a couple of times at a couple of different events in the years before he would go on to actually, write the Ethereum white paper and then go on to kind of start that. And he always struck me as somebody who was just so genuine and had kind of such an intelligence about the way that he was looking at many of these things. Like for a lot of people, it was really very ideological, right? Cryptocurrency was sort of this libertarian phenomenon, where people wanted a system that worked more like they thought it should. And Bitcoin could do kind of most of those things. I don't really think that that's what Vitalik was there for. I think that he was there for kind of the possibilities. And I found that frankly infectious. I remember kind of ambushing him at the first Bitcoin conference I went to in San Jose in 2013. And just complimenting him a bunch of times about all of the articles that he had written that I read. And he didn't have the ability to say anything in kind of response to that. He just kind of it was kind of like it was buffeting him, right? Like he just kind of took it, but didn't really know what to do with it. So it's been really kind of amazing to see all of this kind of grow out of the ideas of someone who, at least on the outside, seemed very timid and kind of very uncomfortable with being in the spotlight. But yeah, that was kind of it. It was like, on the one hand, it's like, this is different than Bitcoin and offers a different value proposition. And that was different because everything was like, oh, Bitcoin was successful and everybody got rich. How do we do the next Bitcoin? And this wasn't that. This was, how do we do the thing that comes after Bitcoin? And then on the other side of it, it was Vitalik.
Right. Yeah, so something completely different. And I guess that's what caught so many people's imaginations. Ken, how about you?
Well, so I had heard about Gav Wood and Vitalik for about a week before I met them. I was at the Texas Bitcoin conference in, I think, early March of 2014. And before I went, I asked someone for a rundown of what to expect there and who I might want to meet. And they were top of the list. And I remember meeting them the first day I was there. And just as Adam said, Vitalik was super shy. He was seemingly uncomfortable in the spotlight where he spoke for, I think, an hour that day. But he clearly had fanboys, and he clearly was a matinee idol. And usually when you're in a room of really smart people and they look to someone as a matinee idol, something substantive is there. The person who I spent much more time with during that 3-day conference and a little bit after was Gav Wood. And Gav, for those who don't know, was the CTO and one of the co-founders of Ethereum along with Vitalik. And Gav still has no time to suffer fools. And I was a fool and I didn't know much about it. And I understood Bitcoin and was holding Bitcoin. So I wanted to learn more about it. But Gav and I spent a lot of time there because we had a friend in common. And it was in that conversation that I got my first sense of how, to Adam's point, Ethereum was different than Bitcoin. And it took about a day, maybe two, for me to understand in my own language how the two differed. But the one thing I walked away from that 3-day conference with understanding was that there is a protocol layer and an application layer, much like there's the internet and an application layer like Google and Uber that sit on top of it. And as I walked away from that conference, what I realized was that Bitcoin was both the protocol layer and an application layer, and that Ethereum had taken away the application layer and bared just simply the protocol layer. So in my mind, Ethereum was the internet when I walked away, and Bitcoin was email. And it just so happened that when Bitcoin was built, because there was no internet, it also had to build its own protocol layer. And so it's a very simplistic view of it, but I'm an investor. And so I frame things in terms that I understand. I held Bitcoin, which at that point I considered a relatively mid-stage investment, call it a Series D investment. And Ethereum had a white paper, basically the equivalent of a PowerPoint in my world, no code. It was still working on its yellow paper, I think at the time. And so that was like a pre-seed investment. And it struck me as someone who was in the business of making money that if they get it right, that this is a very different business, as you aptly put it, Adam. But it is earlier stage and potentially bigger because the protocol layer could be bigger than the application layer. Right. And so from day one, when I made that investment, I didn't fully understand it, but I did understand that if it was successful, it was very different than Bitcoin because it enabled Bitcoins. It enabled companies to be built on top of it. And that felt really, really a massive, massive potential market. For me, it was a bet on Vitalik and Gav. It was a big market with two matinee idols at a conference filled with really smart people, and I didn't need to do much more diligence.
Right. And high risk, high return, right? It really did pay off. Texture, how about you? I love kind of the colorful story you told for the book on like how you learned about Bitcoin and Ethereum. So maybe you can tell it here.
So I was not interested in Bitcoin at all. I thought it was some sort of really lame internet money for nerds distributed by lottery. Like my roommate told me about it when it was $1, and I told him, "Am I allowed to talk like myself, or do I need to like censor myself?"
I think just talk, right?
I told him to fuck off. I was like, I don't care. You know, I'm interested in world-changing things. I'm not interested in whatever this stupid thing is. It wasn't until that it hit 1,200 for the first time that I said, well, it doesn't matter what I think, because clearly other people think whatever. So, you know, he convinced me to listen to Adam's podcast. When I was listening to it, I saw the potential for blockchain as a transformative kind of fundamental shift in the way that we structure value and how things can emerge within the structure of human society. And I just saw it very clearly. And so, you know, I think one of the very few people who didn't read the white paper and then go, holy shit, this is the future. I saw the future. Then I went and harassed Adam during his anniversary. So I drove.
It was my 28th birthday.
And I drove 28 hours. Is that what it was? And I drove 28 hours on his 28th birthday. And I made him sit in the hot tub with me for 6 hours. And we just sat there having our minds blown. Like, it's weird today because you hear about Ethereum and people just, you go, you know, this is Ethereum. And then they go, okay, cool. But when Adam and I had the conversation, like literally our heads hurt. You know, we were sitting there with our hands on our heads and like, it gave us headaches, and it just felt like we were giving birth to some new thing that had never existed before. And it was such a weird, novel experience. And for the first 3 to 6 months, when you would tell somebody about Ethereum, you knew they got it because they were like, I don't, oh shit. And they would start rocking back and forth, and they'd grab their head and they'd be like, my head hurts. Everything's going to change forever. So when I read the white paper, I just thought, this isn't quite it, but it seems close enough, and it must be Kismet. I'm here. This is where this path is taking me. And then we jumped in the Skype room. It was me, Adam, Vitalik, Charles. I don't even remember who else was there, but we were like the first 8 or 9 people in the Skype channel, and that was basically where Ethereum started.
Adam, do you remember those like Skype conversations? What were you guys talking about? Like, how did it feel like to be there at like the very early days?
So, so what I remember about the Skype conversations is that I had a real problem with the pre-mine that they were putting in place, and I actually wound up getting kicked out of the Skype channels. Oh, no. At I think the end of January or maybe early February, as a result of that. But yeah, I think I introduced the project to Charles Hoskinson, who was an early co-founder, to Jonathan Mohan, to Texture, to kind of a bunch of the early players. And those conversations, again, like in hindsight, like I don't know if anybody has records of them, but they would be fascinating because so many of the ideas that would go on to be important, many of which still really haven't been developed, or we still really haven't seen manifest in real life, were discussed at that point. And that's really what I think Texture's talking about as far as kind of like all the possibilities. Like today, 5 years later, again, with the protocol and unabashed success, you would think that most of those ideas would be developed. But I think in practice, we've seen almost none of them developed. And the ones that have been developed, have really not found any sort of meaningful commercial success outside of the sort of super early adopter community. So again, like at the time we were like, oh my God, this is so modern, but it was so, again, just like ahead. And it's not to say, I think that it's really easy to be like, oh, we were so ahead of the times. It's not really that. It's more just like exposure to the ideas when you're someone who is looking for solutions to things that are impossible in the rest of the world. That's what drew me to Bitcoin, was that it made things possible that were impossible before it. And when that's true, and when you have a fundamental technology like that, it kind of requires not just thinking about what are the new ideas, but going back to all the old ideas that didn't work because that thing that is possible now wasn't possible before. And Ethereum was that even more. Ethereum was that, even more.
I would go build on that by saying the ideas that you heard being bandied about in early 2014 for the blockchain, which Adam and Anthony just said didn't really get built, those ideas were actually pretty dumb ideas. And it was, to me, obvious when I heard those ideas that they were dumb ideas, but that didn't matter. Like, if you take fire as an invention and you imagine yourself as a cave person who was the first person who's figured out how to start a fire on a repeat basis, not just get one when there's a lightning strike. And you have that fire, you probably know that it's hot and can warm you. You probably know it's dangerous and might be used as a weapon. You probably know that it creates light. Those are really obvious things really quickly. And you might throw it in a pit or put it on a stick, and all of a sudden, because it's new, people from town or your camp come around and sit around and the campfire gets created. So in the early days of fire, there were probably 4 or 5 really obvious things you could do with it. It took 1 million years for the steam engine to be invented, which allowed us to build cities, extend out into the land. And so when you look at a new technology, it's almost more important to be willing to accept that whatever you think it's going to do is not likely to be what it does at the end of the day. And Ethereum was exactly that. The ideas people were talking about, some of them worked. Some of them never got built. Some of them never got funded for reasons that I think are pretty realistic and reasonable. And I suspect that the absolute biggest ideas of the blockchain are still 5 or 10 years away in our lifetime. So there may be stuff 1 million years out, but in our lifetime, we haven't begun to see the biggest ideas of the blockchain. And that was certainly true with the internet.
No, I think you're totally right. It makes a lot of sense that it was really hard to imagine, what Ethereum would create or can still foster. So, I mean, just curious, like what ideas were people talking about back then, 2014, that to you, Ken, were like really bad ideas? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was some supply chain stuff that obviously this is going to be big in the supply chain. But the people who were talking about the ideas had never bought anything overseas, didn't know what a bill of lading was or a certificate of inspection was. And so when they talk about the supply chain ideas, and I couldn't point to a specific one, it was just obvious that that was not the idea. I can't recall the ideas. I can't recall the good ideas, much less the bad ideas. There were so many in that. There was a competition, basically an incubator for, I think, 2 hours in that Texas Bitcoin conference. And the ideas were so bad, and actually a handful of them got funded. And the best, I think the one that won was storage, which was actually a super interesting idea. And I began to think also, because I think he was 18 at the time and Vitalik was 19, I began to think that I was a grandparent in that industry and probably should stay away. I mean, it was really a young moment in the blockchain, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Okay, so then from this kind of initial moment where you all felt so inspired by Ethereum, in the years that followed, especially the very early years of Ethereum's history, there were obviously tons of roadblocks, problems, from mismanagement, people like Adam being have their doubts about the pre-sale, the DAO, obviously, all of these things happen. So how did your view of Ethereum change throughout kind of the very early days of its history? Yeah, who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Texture.
go ahead. No,
Okay.
I mean, you go ahead.
Okay. All right, I'll go first. So we also got a question that can kind of tie into this from the audience. That what's my issue with the pre-mine and have my thoughts changed? So in the kind of precursor, projects to Ethereum, many projects launched with pre-mines, and it was different from Bitcoin. So for people who are trying to sort of recreate the success that Bitcoin had, it seemed like that was an important thing that you didn't want to do, because it casts doubt on the commitment of the founders of the project because to a large extent, if you have a portion of a pre-mine, then your coin doesn't have to be very successful in order for you basically to have won the lottery and not need to do the project anymore because you already won. So that was my big concern, was sort of concerns about the legitimacy of the project and the ability of it to succeed if it was perceived by people not to be legitimate. I think one of the reasons why it really succeeded was because before they launched the sale of the token, they did such a good job of pulling together a compelling team. And that was something that Bitcoin never had. Bitcoin never had, like the Bitcoin team, right? Core developers showed up and were like, hey, I'm contributing to Bitcoin. And that was pretty much it. There was no like, hey, and now you're on the team moment for them. And with Ethereum,
community too, Adam. Right?
For sure, absolutely. But I think that it was the team that allowed the community to coalesce around it. And then the other thing that Ethereum did really, really well is it talked about itself in ways that were aspirational and very relatable. And I think that was also very different from Bitcoin, which was really, again, like the future of money, right? Which kind of implies that the old way of doing money has to necessarily go. And so it's a very adversarial poise that it took. Whereas Ethereum was doing something that nobody really even believed was possible in the conventional world. But if it was, then it opened up all of these possibilities. So I think that, that's like, just from a messaging standpoint and just from like communicating about what was possible versus what the technology is today, Ethereum was so successful in that I think that is in large part what drove the success of it. And then it was able to kind of backfill that technology in behind the vision, but it was very much a vision first project. And I think it succeeded as a result of that in ways that other projects have not.
So were your concerns about the pre-mine and pre-sale kind of eased after seeing its success?
I mean, sure. Again, like at the point that it succeeds, then obviously my concerns about something preventing it from succeeding kind of went away. Like I still, again, like.
So it's not about like the legitimacy of like Ethereum because of the pre-mine. It's more about like what you said, like, will it prevent it from succeeding?
Right, incentives.
It's getting in the way of a beautiful idea, right? Like if an idea is doomed to failure because it's a bad idea, then it doesn't matter what stupid things you do that might prevent it from succeeding because it's not going to succeed anyways. But it was always obvious that the idea that was at the core of Ethereum was super interesting. And whether it was Ethereum or another project, that was basically what I thought, is that, well, Ethereum is going to lose the game by trying to make it so that their founders win kind of upfront just for having played it all. And that might prevent people from really jumping on. But in practice, that didn't happen at all. In practice, they built a strong enough team that was not the problem.
And I think, but I think what Adam said about the strength, like the strength of the team, most of the people, including myself, were not in Ethereum to get rich. We did not care. And the people that did care about that were the people that ended up kind of being eaten alive and kicked out of the project.
If you look at the great wins in history, and by great wins, I don't mean investment, I'm talking about the building of the great businesses. They shared something in common in addition to having massive markets. And usually they take some new technology and do something new with it. They have incredibly mission-driven teams that are brilliant. And so you can look at lots of ideas, pick social networking. Social networking had 6 degrees and had MySpace before Facebook. Facebook assembled a mission-driven, world-class team. Whatever you think of the company, it was an extraordinary team that built that in the early days. The same thing with Google. There were an awful lot of search engines built into portals, and the Google team was just head and shoulders above everyone else. So it's not even being first, it's about the team. And it was so obvious from day one, whether or not this team got along, there was an extraordinary team.
And we all got the vision. So even after the Red Wedding, even after people stopped communicating, like, it was very strange for me in comms where I ended up. Stefan Twall didn't allow us to talk to anyone else on any team, or he would lose his mind. Like if he found out that you talked to Gav, or if he found out that you talked to Jeff, or if he found out that you talked to anyone not in comms, your whole day was going to be getting lectured about how we couldn't talk to the enemy. And I was like, what the?
So, I mean, to my initial question, like, did these dynamics change your perception of what Ethereum could become, or did it?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, and this happened to actually a lot of people who were founders. I always call myself founding member. I'm not here to argue with anyone. I was there on day one. I don't know how much more close you can get to being a founder, but I don't care about that argument. Um, a lot of people sold their Ether before the Ethereum network launched. I almost did it because it was such a clusterfuck. And I've been in, I've been in startups for years, failed startups for years before that. And there was nothing to indicate to me that it was not about to fail tragically based on the amount of chaos that was happening. So I actually almost sold all my Ether to Vlad, who had already sold all his Ether the week before and regret it. And then the next day, they announced that the network was going live the next week, and I said, "Never mind. It looks like we're going to launch." So, I mean, I lost faith and gained faith, and lost faith and gained faith multiple times over. But I think the fact that everybody that was in the core team understood the vision, and I think most importantly, because there was a white paper and even the yellow paper, it allowed people to coordinate in a decentralized way without actually having to get along, without actually having to communicate. We knew what we were building. We had a document. We just did it and we executed, and it didn't matter the chaos because we all knew what we were doing.
Like a 10 Commandments kind of.
Well, the chaos mattered, right? The chaos definitely got in the way of launching and hitting deadlines and communicating outside. Camila, you captured a story in your book, which I always love, which makes me look stupid, but I always love it because it just said so much about what was going on, which is at one point I reached out to Gav and I said, "Hey, should I sell my Ethereum? Is there anything there?" And it had already been live for, I think, 6 or 7 months. And I thought it was dead. And I thought it was dead because a decentralized project has so many things that are different about it. And in my head, I was just thinking about it the way I thought about any other investment I made. You make an investment, if it's going well, founding teams tell you it's going well. They email you. Well, they couldn't do that here because everybody contributed through Bitcoin from an unknown wallet to their wallet, and you got through a smart contract tokens back. So unless you reached out to the team and said, "I invested," they wouldn't even know and had no way to communicate. So no matter how well they were doing, there was no mechanism for outbound communication. You could only communicate in. And the thing that happens in companies that are dying is they just go radio silent. The founders run out of money. They're embarrassed and they don't want to say that it's going badly. They don't want help. Or they've run out of money. They've taken another job and they don't even realize they need to shut the company down and provide a tax loss, right? This is a group of people who weren't communicating, in part because they were not talking to each other, and in part because they didn't have a mail list to reach out to their fans and supporters. So if you didn't show up at an event and talk to them, or read some blog somewhere, which there was no way to know what existed without being a PhD researcher, I was completely out of the loop. I would occasionally email in, and Joe Lubin, I think, answered my emails as the head of customer service at one point because it was
That's
a smart
so
team.
crazy.
Yeah.
And I was the only one with startup experience as far as I'm aware in the entire project, and I kept my mouth shut about traditional things because I wasn't trying to get locked into a 4-year vesting period. So I didn't want to bring that to anyone's attention. And I didn't want to just start that, "Hey, we're a startup, we should run like a startup." It's like, give me my coins. If it doesn't work out, I don't want to be trapped here for 4 years.
I mean, do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah. What were you going to say, Adam?
Yeah. So 2 things. One, I think that the recognition that Ethereum was a startup, I think that that's really key here because Bitcoin wasn't a startup, like I said in my earlier answer. And then the other thing, Texture, were you still on when Charles and Jonathan and all of them kind of got exited rather rudely? Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Charles is a fuckhead. So, I mean, he's just a terrible person. He's a liar. He's a sociopath. Like, whatever. I'm just, hi, Charles. But the thing about him is that when I met him, the first time I met him in Miami, I was like, this guy's a sociopath, but maybe he's our sociopath. So it's not a big deal. But my understanding was when they were in Zug, he was just doing all kinds of things that were not only not productive for the project, but had enough. They were just games he was playing with random people, and you know, I guess Stefan got drunk one time, and this is my understanding. It's been years since I've been told the story, but Stefan got really drunk, and he was letting Charles's assistant stay with him in London, and he just started berating his assistant and being like, "You love Charles, whatever." Like, and then the dude was like, "No, you love Charles." And then they started talking and found out all this backdoor crazy stuff Charles had been doing, and then that kind of, I know in the book it was presented as like business versus nonprofit or whatever, but the experience was Charles was just doing crazy stuff and everybody showed up to Zug, and like, not to say that there wasn't the threat of those two parties warring, and that does make for a better narrative. But my understanding from all the stories that were told to me, because I was one of the few people that everybody trusted and everyone talked to. No one, I was not on any faction. And so everybody told me their stories. So I got all perspectives. And it basically was like Charles was doing crazy stuff and they had to kick him out. And then people like Amir, and then Mohan actually didn't get kicked out till later. He was on Joe Lubin's side and he had kind of partnered with him. And then, his perspective that he told me was, Joe kind of betrayed him in some way, and then he got ousted. And then I think Mohan was one of the people who sold all his ether before thing. Amir sold all his, to my understanding, and they kind of exited fully. So, I mean,
this is the benefit of not operating like a startup. There's no NDA at the end, so the stories are richer and more colorful. But the truth is that these are the stories of almost every startup. Startups are messy, innovation's messy, and the more you're around it, and the more you have the ear and the trust of the founders, the more you hear that's not an unusual story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've been near startups as well in my own family. Like, everyone is an entrepreneur. Now I'm an entrepreneur too, but I mean, everyone like fights with the co-founders, right? It's like classical startup story.
Yeah.
I think the difference here was that there were so many co-founders and, so many people involved, and they were all coming from different backgrounds, different places. Most of them had really big personalities. So of course there were going to be clashes between all of them, and you can read all about it in The Infinite Machine,
which is a great book. I recommend it
so much. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I think so you all had kind of these ups and downs regarding Ethereum, losing faith, regaining faith. Now, 5 years later, comparing what you thought Ethereum would be when you first, read that white paper, what, you described here in the panel, and looking at where it is today, how does it stack up? Ken, do you want to go?
Sure. It's really interesting. I still have my ups and downs with Ethereum. Once I really started to see the price move and it became an important investment for me, I spent a lot more time trying to understand it so I could make intelligent investment decisions. And the more I understood, the more brilliant it was, the more I liked it, and the more potential I thought. There came a point about a year ago where there were so many competitive solutions out that were doing things that Ethereum had been promising for a while. Ethereum has a history of missing deadlines. And I began to question whether Ethereum could maintain its lead and whether or not one of these new projects would be the Google to Ethereum's AOL. Ethereum just got a second life in this year. And it got a second life from DeFi, because DeFi is giving Ethereum two things. It's giving Ethereum a network effect from liquidity for the DeFi market, which I think is going to be very valuable to buy Ethereum time to get next generation Ethereum out. And two, there's now an installed base of companies that depend on Ethereum that really can't easily move. Partially because they're an installed base, partially there's a network effect around that, and partially there's a network effect around liquidity. So Ethereum's not dying anytime soon. Will somebody beat it? It's entirely possible. If I were a betting person, yes. Will somebody go ahead of Ethereum in the next 2 or 3 years? Much tougher to say no to that question today than 2 years ago. So I do think Ethereum has a good future in front of it in the midterm. But if I were a betting person 10 years from today, I think there would be a better technology that emerges that can do more things faster at lower cost. Retrofitting Ethereum is going to be very hard to make it competitive.
There are some obvious.
ETH2 doesn't do that.
I'm sorry.
No, I was asking Ken whether, I mean, do you think ETH2 doesn't do that?
I'm not sure if it does or doesn't. So I'll give you an example. I'm not sure if sharding is the solution. It may well be. If it's not, it could be that Solana's hardware solution is really very potent. It could be that Coda's mobile phone solution is really very potent. It could be that a privacy blockchain becomes more important as government is more and more involved. So I don't know what it's going to be that's going to be 10x, but anytime we see a protocol that's doing something an order of magnitude different that leads to an order of magnitude or more improvement in performance, I'm going to write a check, because the returns are so asymmetric. Right. You can only lose 100% of your money, but you can make thousands of times on your money if you get this bet right. So from an investment standpoint, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Maybe, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah.
Adam?
I mean, Ethereum was the first, successful cryptocurrency or protocol, perhaps a cryptocurrency protocol as a startup. So I think that there could be more successful startups. I also think that maybe there's another structure besides what Bitcoin did and besides what Ethereum did that winds up being the thing. Maybe DAOs are it, right? Like that's an idea that's been around for longer than Ethereum, arguably. Called DAOs now, called DACs at the time, distributed autonomous corporations from the Laramers in the very early days.
They're not mutually exclusive, Adam, are they, in your view?
Well, I mean, the reality of it is that name changed because everybody was like, oh, if they're corporations, then they're probably regulated, but organizations,
that's illegal.
Yeah. So I mean, like
and we liked the play on DAO, like DAO, like the philosophical thing.
Right. But the ideas are fundamentally almost identical. I mean, like this kind of autonomous structure, where instead of kind of having a hierarchical system, which is what typically organizations are, instead you have basically a flat system where everybody kind of contributes. And it's the whole idea of the, what did I say at the time? The intelligence being at the edge of the network rather than at the center of the network. And so I think that again, like there's a lot of potential there. What was the actual question, Cami? I'm sorry.
How has Ethereum played out relative?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like I think as a startup, it's been wildly successful. It's demonstrated the path forward, and I think that we've seen in the years since, in the 2017 years and kind of all the ICO stuff, like everybody wanted to be Ethereum when they grew up, and many of the projects that are out there, are still kind of aspiring to be that, and it's a very crowded space. But again, if you look back at like what Ethereum didn't succeed by being the next Bitcoin. Ethereum succeeded by being something completely different. And I think that that's really what we're still waiting for now. We're still in this post-Ethereum, pre-whatever the next thing is era. And so long as we're there, it's hard to...
Now, Adam, Ethereum, is Ethereum still a leader in the space?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Ethereum's without question a leader in the space, just like Bitcoin is. Like Ethereum being invented and being successful doesn't have any negative impact on Bitcoin. If anything, it further emphasizes the value of these decentralized platforms and how powerful they can be. It's just a different type of decentralized platform.
I agree.
Yeah.
How about for you, Texture?
So for me, because again, I didn't come into Ethereum reading the white paper and then imagining the network in that way. I imagined it, what it was that could be accomplished, and in what ways it could be accomplished, and what types of structures needed to be implemented for it to work. And so, like I said, I read the white paper. I said, this isn't quite it, but it's close enough. So a lot of the things that, like, we were discussing this in the green room, like a lot of people are trying to load all the computation on the layer 1. That's ridiculous. People still haven't realized that's ridiculous. The initial DAO, they were writing code that was far too complex in a language and on a system that had not had a history of finding bugs. And the way that you patch security holes is you have to fail, find them, and then, you know, modify the system. And they went too large, too fast. The next thing is that, you know, if you look at what we're trying to accomplish with this decentralized computation, the fundamental structure of both Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all Ethereum competitors is actually fundamentally wrong from the ground up. And I think the mistake that Ethereum made is that because it was based off of Bitcoin, the base protocol layer rests in being a cryptocurrency first and a computational layer second. What you actually want to do is you want to coordinate the distribution of computational machinery, right? So you want to be able to distribute computational structures in a decentralized manner. So like little microservers that do things, you want to be able to have one of those layers be cryptocurrency. Maybe you can spin up other cryptocurrencies, but you also have things like managing just basic distribution of files, right? So things like IPFS, things like storage. Now, what you really, I think the next iteration of what blockchain should be that is not Ethereum, that is not a permutation of Ethereum, that is not an Ethereum killer or copy, is reconceptualizing from the ground up that actually something like Ethereum, something like Bitcoin, something like storage should actually be built on a base protocol which serves those things, right? So you kind of want to look at things like Kubernetes or those type of things, and then kind of imagine a base layer almost like a decentralized app store with secure, executable, verifiable code that's distributed that way. You know, to me, that was always obviously what the thing should have been. Ethereum is the step. And when I see that next thing, you know, somebody executing on that, which I've still seen no one even come close to even conceptualizing this. That's when I see that coming, that's the team that I think I will see that has the vision for the next step in what we're working towards.
Maybe we should look out for texture chain for that. And I think we need a whole different panel to talk about, you know, how blockchain should be like redesigned. It's you know, interesting for sure. I think, you know, for now we need to be wrapping up, but you know, I think it's clear that Ethereum has succeeded at least to some extent on its 5th birthday. Yet to be seen whether how far that it will continue to grow, if it will continue to lead in the smart contracts application space. So far it's leading, but we'll see what happens for the 10th birthday. It was great catching up with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, for
an interesting conversation.
Thanks for writing the book and everything you did.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.